Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and in this tutorial we're going to look at the idea of scope in the context of beans in this case. So scope's a very important notion, and we've already seen in the tutorial on setting and getting beans that a bean has a scope, and we set the scope here to session, and scope is probably session is probably the most useful scope for a bean, and the idea is that the bean will then be available in a kind of typical browsing session. Now what actually happens is that if you set a bean with session scope, a cookie gets set on the browser, and that cookie has a timeout which I think in Tomcat 6 at the moment, I think that is by default set to 10 minutes, although you can change that by adding an entry to web.xml for the server. But let's take a look at how this actually works. So if I run getBean here, at the moment it's saying email is null, so because I haven't set the bean. And let's go to that link in a browser. So I'm going to start Chrome here, and in fact I'm going to start a new incognito window, and let's go to getBean so the bean isn't set. And now I'm going to go to setBean.jsp to set a bean with session scope. And if I now go to getBean in my browser, and just to show you I could go to some other URL first, so it doesn't have to be literally the next page, then the bean is now set. But if I quit this incognito window, and the reason I'm using this incognito window is because it will clear the cookies when I quit it. So I quit that and start a new incognito window again and go to getBean. Now it's back to null. So you see that a bean with session scope depends on the cookie for its existence. If you don't visit a page that uses this bean for 10 minutes, then that bean will expire. But the cookie can survive browser restarts, because let's go to setBean here. So I'll go to getBean to start with, so that's not set, and let's go to the setBean.jsp that sets the bean, and I'm going to go now to getBean again, and there's my bean set. And let's just copy that URL, go to my home page, quit Chrome, now start Chrome again, and let's go to getBean.jsp, and you can see that the value is still set, because although I restarted the browser, I didn't clear the cookies, and therefore the bean is still around. So that's session scope, and it's kind of trying to capture the idea of a typical sort of browsing session where you're going to be visiting pages at least every 10 minutes or so. Now, as I say, there are a few other scopes. There are 3 other, in fact. And to demonstrate those, I'm going to create a new JSP page here. Let's create one called setPageBean.jsp, and we're going to take a look at the page scope. And I'll also create one called let's see, new. Actually, I'll right click the project here, right click and go to new JSP, and I'll call this getPageBean.jsp. Hit finish, and I'm going to go to setBean.jsp, copy the contents of this and paste them into my setPageBean.jsp, and I'm going to change the scope here to page, and let's change the name of the bean, which at the moment I've got set to user 1. I'm going to set it to user 2, just to avoid any kind of confusion with the last bean. And similarly, I'm going to go to getBean.jsp, which sets the session bean, copy that, go to getPageBean.jsp, paste it in, and let's change the name of this to user 2 as well, and I'm going to change this useBean also to page. Now the idea with a page bean is that you can only use it on the page. So if I copy this now, if I copy the bit that uses the bean and paste it into setPageBean, let's run setPageBean. So in setPageBean, I'm using the bean, specifying the class that I want to use, setting the scope to page, setting a couple of properties, and then echoing back one of the properties. And if I run this now, of course it's going to work. And in fact, yeah, but if I go to get page bean now, let's go to get page bean, it's not going to work, because if you set the scope to page, then you literally can only use the bean literally on that page. And let's just put a comment there here to make this clear. Won't work. Bean has page scope. So page scope means you can only use the bean actually on the page that you're on. Now let's look at request scope. So I'm going to right click web content again, create a new JSP here. What did I do? Yeah, okay, and I'm going to call this set request bean.jsp. Click finish, and let's also have a new JSP get request bean.jsp. Click finish, and let's go to set bean again. Let's go to set page bean and copy the contents of that and paste it into set request bean. And let's go to get request, let's go to get page bean, in fact, last one that we created here, and paste it into get request bean. Where are we? Get request bean. Okay, I'm just going to close some of these other pages here because it's getting a little bit confusing. So control there, let's get rid of, wow, I really have got a lot of pages open. Okay, there we go. Right, so we've got set request bean and get request bean, and I'm going to change the scope here to request, sorry. Change the scope to request, so let's change that for both of these pages, the set and get page. And I'm going to change the name of the bean as well to avoid confusion to user 3. User 3, user 3, user 3 here, and here I'll have user 3. Now with set request, if I use the request scope, of course it's going to work on a page that I'm on. So if I run this now, there we go, that's setting and getting it within one page. But let's get rid of this now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to, actually first I should show you, here I've got this get request bean. Let's run set request bean. Okay, so now that's set the bean, and let's go to get request bean, and in fact it can't get it. And the reason for that is that with request scope, your bean is limited to the scope of one request from the browser. So if I go to set request bean and then I go to the get request bean page, that's 2 requests, and the bean won't survive to the next request. If I have a, let's take a look at, for example, a redirect. If I have a, let's have a request, actually I think it's response.send redirect, send, because I want to send a redirect response to the browser telling it to redirect. And let's see if I can redirect to the page get request bean.jsp. I think that's right. So now let's run this set request bean. Click finish, and there we go, we've redirected to get request bean, and the bean is null because a redirect again is 2 requests, because what happens is you send a command to the browser that basically says, okay, you're on this page, but now go and get this page. So again, it's 2 requests, and we end up on this get request bean page even though I ran set request bean and we went to that initially, but the bean is going to be null. But now let's have a look at what happens with a forward. So if I have here a JSP forward like that, and I set the page to get request bean.jsp. I think that's all I need. Then now if I run set request bean, we're gonna go to set request bean page, but in the same request we're actually gonna data we're gonna get back will be from get request bean, because that's what a forward does. So the browser only sees, the browser only makes one request, and because we're within the scope of one request, now the bean can be retrieved in get request bean. And you'll notice, as I explained in a previous tutorial, we're still seeing the URL set request bean, because a forward literally just takes the contents that would have been output and replaces it with the contents of the forward. So your browser only sees one page, it's one request. And finally, we've got application scope, which is also very useful. So let's create a new JSP here and call it set application bean.jsp. Click finish, and let's create a new JSP get application bean.jsp. Click finish. And I'm gonna let's go to set request bean and copy that and paste it into set application bean and change the scope to application. And I'll change the name of the bean to user4. I'm going to get rid of this forward as well. And let's go to get request bean, copy that, and let's create a new file, new JSP, set application bean.jsp. Oh yeah, I mean get application bean, because I already created the set one. Maybe I already created that one as well, going balmy. Yeah, I've got set application bean and get application bean. Did I just do that? Oh well, anyway, okay. So let's have a look at get request bean here and copy that and put it into get application bean. And so my set application bean, so there's get request bean, let's get rid of that. My set application bean has the bean name user4 scope application, and get application bean here, I also want to set it to user4, name of the bean, and scope again application. Now the application scope is great because it means that the scope of the bean will be your application. So let's go to set application bean, and I can go to get application bean here. And in fact, even if this is not dependent on cookies, so even if I copy this, start a completely different browser with different cookies, and go to get application bean, the bean is still set. And in fact, if you have get application, if you use an application scope for your bean, the scope of it is going to be your whole application. So let's for example, let's just quit this browser and stop Tomcat like that, and let's run get application bean again. So if I run that now, whoops, I went to set application bean by mistake. Let's check I didn't do anything funny here. That seems okay. Let's restart Tomcat again. So I'm going to stop it, and actually let's try going to controller.java, because that definitely doesn't have anything to do with beans. So I just want to restart Tomcat, and then let's start a browser here and go to get application bean, and we can see that the value is not set because I restarted my application, so the value was lost. So with the application scope, your bean persists as long as your application is up and running, and it's valid for any number of users. So like you could have one user set it and another user get it, for example, in a different country or something. It doesn't matter. So it's not for application scope, it's not limited to a browser, it's not limited to a session, or it doesn't depend on cookies. it's purely associated with your application. Of course, if you wanted, you could have the application save the value of it before it shut down or whatever. So just to summarize now, page scope means you can only use the bean on one page. It won't survive a redirect, but it's fine, and it won't survive a forward either. It has to be literally on the same page. Request scope means your bean is scoped to the request, so as long as you're making one request in the browser and getting a page back, the bean will be there, and that means it's no good, it won't survive a redirect, so that's two requests from the browser effectively, but it will survive a forward because a forward happens within one request. Session scope basically sets a cookie in a browser that expires after like 10 minutes. So as long as the cookie is there, or as long as the user keeps going to different pages, then your session bean will be there. And finally, application scope is scoped to the application. So application scope is not per user, it's per your web application, and it spans multiple users, multiple browsers, multiple pages, and it has the widest of all the scopes. So that's it for scopes. Quite a lot of information there, but it's a really important topic to understand, very, very useful. And that's it for this tutorial. And so until next time, happy coding.